Right, so we're going to come on to a different set of joints now that are going to require a few different tools. So I'll introduce those to you before we do anything else. So I've got a slightly different saw set up here. This is called a coping saw. Very different to a tenon saw, okay? Very different to a tenon saw. The blade on a tenon saw is just designed for doing straight lines, so the depth of the blade is a bit of an advantage for keeping things straight. With a coping saw, the blade is very narrow, so it gives you the chance to be able to cut in curves. So that's one thing to remember. And the other thing that's important about a coping saw is you understand that the teeth on the coping saw face backwards, so they cut when you pull rather than when you push. Okay, so that's a coping saw, C-O-P-I-N-G saw. And what else have we got? So we've got a different chisel this time around as well. So if we look at the bevel edge chisel that I've been using for powering out my joints, for cutting my joints off, this one is different, okay? This one is called a mortising chisel. So it gets its name from the kind of joint that is commonly used to cut out, which is called a mortise and tenon. So a mortising chisel. Very different to a normal chisel, right? It's got this metal ring around the end, which is designed so that it can be hit quite hard with something without splitting the end of the timber. The other thing that's important to look at is the thickness of the chisel. It's much thicker than a bevel edge chisel. That's stiffer and stronger basically for cutting out joints, and the end of the mortising chisel is honed at a slightly steeper angle. So it's a chisel that's designed for being hit vertically down into timber, right? So that's our mortising chisel. And then going along with the mortising chisel, we've got a different kind of marking gauge. Okay, so they look similar. You know, they've got that long straight bit that you hang on to. They've got the screw thread that you use to loosen off, and you can slide that bit up and down. But this one has got an extra feature that makes it very useful for cutting certain joints. So we're going to look at one called a bridle joint at the moment, and I might be using this mortising chisel with it. So I'm going to set it up for this mortising chisel. Now, first thing I do, look, is I've got the screw on the end of it, and what I'm doing, I loosen that screw off, and you can notice that there are 2 pins rather than 1 pin on the gauge, okay? Now those 2 pins need to be the same width apart as the width of the mortising chisel. Now here's a trick, right? Not right at the end of the pins, but halfway down the pins is where you're trying to measure from. So halfway down the pins, it's the same as the width of the mortising chisel. Right, so that's the first thing you've got to do. Second thing you've got to do now is you've got to set the width of your timber up so that it's going to be level and equal both sides of the wood where you're going to make it. So set and spike it. Let's just make a mark. Let's just measure that up. Okay, so I've got 12 millimeters and 12 millimeters that side, so that's nice and even. Right, now get your mortising chisel, sorry, your mortising gauge, and scribe your parallel double lines there, look, and scribe your parallel double lines across the end grain as well, and scribe your parallel double lines down the timber going in this direction. So there are your lines that are set for doing our bridle joint. Now we do need those on both pieces of wood for this one, so I've got to repeat that same procedure. 1, 2, 3. So there's my lines going in. If I go over them with pencil, you'll be able to see them a bit clearer. 1, 2, and this one right here as well. So you can see my parallel lines going around the timber. I'll do the same on this one, look. 1, along here, here, and down here, like so. Now, next thing, we're going to be cutting a bridle joint, so we need to cut in that far into the wood if we're not leaving that bit sticking out, the horn that we talked about before. Get your tri-square, bring a line across. Make sure that line goes across there, all the way along the face, halfway there and over. Right, now, with your bridle joint, you're going to cut the 2 cheeks off. That's this bit here and this bit here. On one of the pieces. So you're taking the 2 outside layers off, and you guess now, on the other piece you're going to cut just the inside section off. Now for that one, I'm going to bring that line all the way around there lightly and come to this side so it's in the same place. So on this one, we're going to cut the middle of the wood out like this. Okay, so there's my waste wood marked out. Now it's a case of doing the cutting well. So I've got a combination there of rip cuts vertically down and cross cuts across the end of the grain of the wood. So I'll do my cross cuts first on this side of the bridle joint. Going to be similar to the halving joint really, isn't it? The corner halving joint in particular, where we're going to be able to cut down the shoulder here. So when you get down to the line, turn it over, do the other side whilst we're doing the cutting. Okay, so once you've done that, like I said before, you're going to use the grain of the wood to your advantage here, right? Because you're going to deliberately split the wood down that grain to remove these cheeks from your bridle joint. Taking these away. Sometimes big bits come off, so you have to be quite careful. Par that down then. Don't use a mallet for that bit. Just don't dig it in too much. Just make sure the chisel's nice and sharp, and you should be able to par that and make a nice flat face to the cheek of the joint. So you're going to do this on both sides, like this. Just get down to that line. And once you've done that bit, turn it over and do the same on the other side. Like I say, you're using the grain of the wood to your advantage there because it wants to split in that direction, which is very useful, rather than doing that long ripping cut that you don't really want to do. Like this one. Okay, so I'm getting close to that now, look. Okay, so I've got, hopefully, 2 parallel cheeks cut out. That side of the joint there is called the tenon side of the joint, because I partly cut it out with a tenon saw. And then this part that it's going to go into is the other side of the bridle joint. It's not the mortise part, okay, because this isn't quite a mortise and tenon joint just yet. Okay, now this one I've got no choice, unfortunately, other than to cut the ripping cut. I cannot do it any other way, so I now need to get into a nice rhythm and cut down the grain of the wood. Now, tenon saw is not really designed for this cut, okay? So I have to keep my mind on what I'm doing. Bring the back of the saw down a little bit. Make sure it stays straight. I'll bring the front of the saw down and stay on that line, look, that you can see. Am I going off the line a little bit? Look at that, now see? Easy to wander off the line a little bit. I'd rather be doing this with a rip saw, to be honest. Well, I'm not very happy with that one. I've gone off the line slightly there, look, which is not good. Okay, next one then, I'm going to try and bring it a bit lower down the vise. Cut this one a bit more accurately. Should we eyeball that as well, look? Okay. That's okay, we can get away with that. And move that out of the way. And down the front. Okay, so there's my 2 rippet cuts done. Hard work there. Now, so next thing you're going to do is you want to chop the middle of that wood out. So here's you've got problems, right? Obviously, chiseling, well, it's one option. You can't do it with the chisel that you've got there, though. So if you're going to chisel it, you probably want to get hold of a mortising chisel. And with your mortising chisel, you'd find that what you'd be doing is cutting into the wood in that direction. That's okay, it's a long job to do that, so the best thing I find is to go for the coping saw. So with your coping saw, all you need to do, drop it down to the bottom of the cut you just made, hold the handle in both hands, and gently, as you start cutting, start to turn the handle around 90 degrees, and it's going to cut across the width of the wood. Like this, until that section comes out. Right, so now we have both sides of our bridle joint. Now the good thing is, look, that I'm in the excellent position of the joint being slightly too tight. So what I need to do is go in, get my bevel chisel out again, and pass some more off the cheeks of the joint. So keep fettling it down, just working it down until, and don't take off too much at once, right? Until it's a good fit going in. So I'm just taking off like 0.5 millimetre at a time, really. You can be that accurate with timber. Some people can be even more accurate than that with timber. Don't take too much off now. Very frustrating. Nowadays we benefit from a thing called gap-filling glues that can fill gaps where you make joints slightly too loose. In the olden days, no such thing existed, so you had to be bang on accurate when you were working. So take time building your skills. Okay, so it's going to fit in there. Okay, and that is my bridle joint. I could probably have cut down a bit deeper, maybe even left a hole on the top of that joint. So there's your bridle. Everybody okay with that one? That's quite a tricky joint to cut, but it's not as difficult as the next one, which is the mortise and tenon joint. So once you're done, you pack it away, clear your work surface up. So these tools, now that we don't use all the time, which is your mortising gauge and your coping saw and your mortising chisel, they live in a separate location because we don't use those all the time really. So keep them separate, clean down your work area, and then you're ready for the next joint.